A lot of people have been commenting and even emailing me, asking if I've seen Hank Green's recent video about the Artemis photos. Yes, I have, and what an amazing video it is. If you haven't seen it, I'll leave a link down below, you can go and check it out, but the premise of it is basically, NASA recently released around 12,000 photographs that were taken during the Artemis II mission. I'd speculated in a recent video the astronauts were taking thousands of photos, but maybe only sending select ones back to Earth due to bandwidth limitations, and that the rest would start to make their way into the public domain once the cameras were returned to Earth, which turns out to seemingly be exactly what's happened. So on the Gateway to Astronaut Photography website, which I've actually used before to get photos from the International Space Station, all the photos from Artemis II have been uploaded there. Now, unfortunately, at least at the moment, the photos are only available in a JPEG format. With a lot of the ISS shots, you get the option to download the original RAW file. And looking at the camera data on the website for the Artemis photos, they were originally NEF files, which is the RAW format for Nikon cameras that were used on board Artemis. Though I don't envy hosting 12,000 RAW files when there's so many people interested in looking at them. That would probably crash the entire site, so perhaps the RAWs will come along at a later date. For now though, there is still plenty of images for people to sift through, and Hank shared an amazing time-lapse that someone had made using some of the Artemis photos. Now, most of us have probably seen the Hello World photo that NASA published very early on during the mission. I even did a video specifically about it and comparing it to the famous blue marble shot from Apollo 17. And it turns out, much like that blue marble, which was just one selected frame from a sequence of photos, so too is the one from Artemis. They took dozens of photos of Earth as they were orbiting around the shadow side, and just the best one was sent back to be published. And so somebody had the bright idea of putting all of these photos together as a time-lapse, and the result is, frankly, awe-inspiring. You not only see the Earth shrinking as they get further away, but you see life basically happening. Lightning storms and the auroras taking place, and you can even see satellites orbiting Earth. Now, Hank was pretty confident that they were satellites, but wasn't entirely sure how they were being seen. If I take my globe, for example, I put a very bright light behind it and then place the camera on the opposite side so you can't actually see the light itself, I can still hold up objects around the edge of the Earth and catch glimpses of the light reflecting off it. So this will be satellites being picked up as they fly around near the Earth's terminator line that's separating night from day, given that the time lapses from the ISS often pick up satellites in the exact same manner as they near sunrise. And seeing this actually inspired me to go and have a look through the photo archives myself to see what I could come up with. Well, thank heavens I've still got that little downloader program that Planarwalk coded for me a few years ago, because that made getting this many photos so much easier. But even without that, it's actually quite interesting to just load the photos up on the website as a string of thumbnails and scroll down the page, because they play out almost like a slideshow in of itself. However, doing so, you tend to see there's two main types of photo sequences. You'll either see a sequence of photos where they're almost identical, same exposure and pretty much the same composition, or you'll see a sequence where the exposure is constantly changing. Now, the reason for this, I mentioned in my last video, cameras have a limit to the range of light that they can capture. A sensor's made up of millions of photosites. Each photosite collects photons of light during an exposure. As the photons hit the photosite, they generate a small electrical charge. The more photons that a photosite collects, the bigger the charge, and therefore the brighter the pixel becomes. Now, the photosite needs a certain amount of photons hitting it in order to register that there's something there, but after a certain amount of photons, it can't register any more, and it can only display the pixel as just pure white. And the range between the highest and lowest amounts of light that the sensor can detect is known as dynamic range. So in photos like this of the moon, you've got areas that are lit by the sun and so are very bright, and you've got other areas that aren't lit by the sun, so are obviously very dark. But there isn't no light hitting those parts of the moon. Parts of the moon that are in shadow but that can still see the Earth will be getting some light reflecting from the Earth to it. And you've got billions of stars around you. Sure, each one is very faint from our perspective, and even combined they don't come close to the brightness of the sun, but they are putting small amounts of light hitting the moon that can then be reflected off to reach the camera. So when taking photos with very bright and very dark areas, you're usually exceeding the limit of your camera's dynamic range. So you'll either end up with the bright parts being too overexposed or the dark regions being too underexposed and details being lost. Now, a technique that photographers can use to get around such situations is called HDR, or High Dynamic Range Photography. These combine multiple photos that are taken at different exposures. Some cameras will have a HDR mode built into them where it will automatically merge them. But many cameras have a shooting mode called bracketing, in which rather than just taking the one photo at the exposure you set, the camera automatically takes an extra couple of photos, some brighter and some darker, in order to bracket around the photo that you originally took. So on my camera, for example, I have a choice of a few different modes. I can have the lowest range, which is 0.3 EV3 image. So this takes the photo that I wanted, then a photo that's 1/3 of an EV darker, and one photo that's 1/3 of an EV brighter. Now, one full EV is half or double the amount of light. So 1/3 of an EV is only a fraction of a difference. So you're basically getting 3 photos with only a very slight difference in exposure. But I can take that all the way to 3 EV 5 images. This takes the normal mid photo, then one photo that's a full 3 EV brighter, another photo that's a further 3 EV brighter, one photo that's 3 EV darker, and one that's a further 3 EV darker. So that's 6 EV brighter and 6 EV darker for a total range of 12 EV on top of whatever the camera can naturally achieve. If you then merge all of those into a single file, you've got all the information from the bright regions as well as the very dark regions in one photo. So when you then raise the shadows, it can pull the detail from the very bright image without losing the highlights. So during the Artemis mission, they were frequently shooting in bracketed mode, perhaps with the intention of merging them later, or perhaps just to ensure that at least one of them got a good exposure. You know, in the sense of throw enough and some will stick. In fact, Mission Commander Reed Wiseman in one of his social media posts even made reference to the fact that they were shooting bracketed. And the other style of shot you'll see is where they take a series of almost identical looking photos. Now this can offer a few potential benefits. First is increased resolution. Most camera sensors employ what is called the Bayer filter. Because photosites detect just photons, they can't directly tell what colour the light is supposed to be. So a Bayer filter is a colour filter that's placed on top of the photosites, which restricts what colour light can reach a particular photosite. Typically, half the photosites will be limited to green light, a quarter to red, and a quarter to blue. So if light is coming from a blue object, if it's hitting a particular part of the sensor, the light that hits the blue photosites will be able to pass through and get detected by the photosites. But the light that's then hitting the green and red photosites will get filtered out. So the camera sensor can then look at it and go, okay, this object is clearly blue. But that essentially means that a lot of the photosites can be potentially registering nothing. And the camera then just has to sort of fill in the blanks afterwards. So some modern cameras employ a mode called something like super resolution. In this mode, the camera will take 4 photos, but between each shot, it shifts the sensor by 1 pixel and then combines the 4 photos together. Doing this means every single pixel of the scene will then be seen by red, green, and blue photosites without needing to fill in any blanks. Now, this doesn't directly increase the resolution of the file, but it does increase the amount of detail within the final photo. Though typically for this, if the camera's doing it automatically, you need the camera to be perfectly still in relation to your scene. That kind of rules out shooting handheld. But in theory, shooting handheld, because the camera's shaking slightly, then combining a load of photos later will likely mean more of the scene is covered by the various colours of the filter. And even if not, stacking multiple photos can increase the clarity of fine details within an image, because during the process of capturing a photo, all that information from the sensor is being run through electronic circuits that introduce a little bit of background interference. Not usually enough for people to really notice, but what can often happen is very faint details within the image could be mistaken for noise. However, noise is random. It varies from shot to shot. For example, look at the various Earth shots that make up the time-lapse that Hank shared. This was shot at a very high ISO, so the noise is very noticeable. If you pick any individual frame and zoom in on it, we can make out the big details like the large clouds and the bright lights, but they're muddied a lot by noise. But the noise pattern changes from frame to frame, but the underlying detail of the Earth remains constant. So if you stack multiple images together and use something like a mean filter in Photoshop, then for every individual pixel of the scene, it basically takes an average of all of the photos. And when we do this with a few of the Earth photos here, you see that the finished stacked image has a lot less noise than any one individual photo did. And we can now make out details like the faint clouds over the ocean and some more lights on the ground in Africa. This is a trick often used by astrophotographers because faint stars can often be mistaken for noise. But if that particular pixel is always showing a dot across, say, a dozen photos, then it's obvious that there's something there, it's not just random noise. And it also multiplies the data. For example, if you have a very faint star in one frame, so it's very, very dim, it might only be a fraction brighter than the surrounding blackness of space. But if you take 100 photos of it and combine them, you essentially have 100 times more data for that specific pixel, so it can make that star much brighter and more noticeable. And I think perhaps that is what is being done with the Artemis shots. I saw some posts on social media by an astrophotographer who apparently was working alongside the Artemis crew in the build-up to the mission to sort of train them on how to get these good photos. And they've taken a series of close-up shots of the moon and stacked them together to begin to reveal colours and details that aren't obvious with a single shot. Anyway, that's the science behind why they were shooting so many photos. The upshot for us, as we've seen, is sequences of these can be put together in a time-lapse with some very interesting results. And I have made a few of my own. Hank highlighted within his video, there's so many photos most people can't look through them, but he's made a website called Artemis Timeline, I think it is, where there's a voting page and you can go on and you can vote for your favourite images. And at the moment at least, people's favourite ones from Artemis seem to be the photos that were taken as the crew were flying around the backside of the moon and the moon was eclipsing the sun. And again, they took a lot of photos during this time. They took mixtures of zoomed in shots and wide shots, showing the moon as it was first eclipsing the sun, as they were flying around the backside of the moon, and then as they were coming out of the eclipse as well. So I took some of these and I put them together into some short time lapses. Now, I had to do all of these by hand, putting every photo into Photoshop as a separate layer, moving every single one manually to align it with the previous layer. At first, I tried anchoring each of the photos to the stars, so the stars remain fixed in the frame and the moon can be seen moving across as the crew pass by it. But then I did another where I changed the anchor point to be the horizon of the moon, so the edge of the moon remains fixed in the frame and everything else moves. And I think I like this one more because you can see the twisting of the moon and the stars better, showing that the camera's going around the moon. But this is only a short one due to the limited number of photos. However, they did another sequence of photos as they were flying around the moon with a much wider view, so you can see the moon in its entirety and you can see more of space itself. And I think these were slightly longer exposures as well, so they're slightly brighter and clearer. And again, I tried first anchoring them to the stars to see the moon moving, though this one turned out to be quite jumpy. Partly due to me not always getting the shots properly aligned, and partly because the exposure kept changing from shot to shot. So I did another one where I again aligned them all based on the moon, but this time I went through photo by photo and adjusted the brightness of each to try and get it more consistent. And this is the finished result. I again really love the fact that you can see the perspective change as they travel past the moon, and the fact that the first frame or two you see reflections in the window. But arguably my favourite time-lapse of this was as they were on the daylight side of the moon. They took a time-lapse through the window, but the window frame is partly obstructing the moon. Now, this was made up of over 900 photos. Fortunately for me, this was either taken with someone who had a very steady hand, or they had some way of keeping the camera fairly well anchored in place, because it didn't really move around much. So for this one, I didn't need to manually align every single photo separately, which I'm bloody thankful for, because my computer sounded like it was dying just trying to load them into Photoshop in the first place. What I was able to do was just put them all into a straight time-lapse video, and then put it into Premiere Pro and apply a stabilizer to take out most of the camera movement. Then I just had to go through the video and manually stabilize it myself. And I personally love this one because, one, it's such a long, smooth time-lapse view as they're passing by the moon. But also, I think having the window frame there makes it feel more like you're actually there in person looking out of the window. Now, whilst they were passing by the moon, they also watched the Earth set behind it. Reed Wiseman posted a video of this happening in which you can hear Christina taking a lot of photos at the same time. And the photos that she took were a mix of wide views and zoomed in photos, so I again made a couple of time lapses of these. So you can see the Earth move out of view behind it, and we see some perspective change of the moon as well. So I next anchored them to the Earth. But I used all of the photos, the wide views and the zoomed in shots, and I kept the time-lapse cropped in close so that we can see the moon move in to block the Earth. I also put together this time-lapse which shows the Earth reappearing on the other side of the moon, so at the end of the communications blackout as Orion came out from around the backside of the moon. And interestingly, if you compare the Earth before it goes out of view to when it comes back into view, you can see the shift in rotation because of the amount of time that's passed. I then put together this close-up view of the moon in good light, again showing the perspective of it changing. And I even found a few series of photos of Earth that allowed me to see some more rotation. The first was only short because it's only 3 frames, however the photos had such a sufficient gap between each one that quite a lot of rotation is visible. I was then able to find a longer sequence of photos that again seems to be in 3 distinct chunks, but altogether give quite a lot of rotation, and the first stint has quite a lot of photos, so it gives a very smooth turn as well. Now there may well be some more potentially good material for more time lapses, but I just haven't come across them yet. I will keep an eye out on it though. I rather like the results of some of these, though granted I don't think any of mine come close to that original one that Hank shared. However, when scrolling through the various photos, I found a few that I was able to bring to life in a rather different way, and the results of some of those absolutely blew my mind. But those are for the next video. For now, as always, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video and you haven't already done so, then please do consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons, and hopefully we'll see you in the next video.